IB Nation, welcome back to another edition of the Irish Breakdown Podcast. It is Tuesday, November 19th. Trev, we're 9 days away from Thanksgiving, and we are 5 days away. So Wednesday, Thursday, 4 days away from Notre Dame taking on Army. This is going to be a big opportunity for Notre Dame. We're going to dive into all the reasons why during the show today. You know, right now, Army last week, when you look at the college football playoff rankings last week, Army was, I believe they were 24th last week, Trevor. Number 23 loss, number 22 loss, and number 19 loss, and number 18 loss, number 16 lost. My guess is that the Black Knights, who were off last week, are going to probably go up a little bit in the rankings. How much could have an impact on what Notre Dame's final resume looks like, Trev? We'll obviously get a look at that, but it's a huge opportunity for Notre Dame, and we're going to talk about that today. We're going to kick things off here in a minute. We're going to actually talk about Notre Dame in Texas. Notre Dame's announced today that they're scheduled Texas. We're going to talk about 10-15 minutes just about that matchup, and then dive into what the schedules look like moving forward for Notre Dame in future years, and then we'll dive into sort of a what's at stake for Notre Dame. Right, this is kind of what we do on Tuesday, especially now that the playoff rankings are coming out. You know, what's at stake for Notre Dame, and there's a lot of talk about Notre Dame's just kind of let's just assume that Notre Dame's in the playoffs, and we're gonna say hold on a second, let's talk about this for a second. And then we'll preview Army. We'll take a look at Army. We'll talk about what makes their offense and defense good, and what's unique about this matchup, and you know what makes them like Navy, what makes them different from Navy, what are the unique challenges that Notre Dame is going to have to face in this matchup. So that's everything that we've got going on today. So I'm excited about Trevor. Very excited about this show and very excited about this week. I know you are too. You're going to be making the trip to New York. It's going to be your first road game that you've covered for Notre Dame, so I know you're excited about that. And boy, lots going on. I've done the Yankee Stadium thing. It's a pretty cool experience, you know, to be able to watch a football game inside there. And as someone who was in the old Yankee Stadium, it's a whole different stadium than the new Yankee Stadium. So you'll enjoy it, Trevor. But it's going to be a big one for Notre Dame, no doubt.
I'm excited, man. It's my first time out to New York City ever. My little sister lives out there, so we get to spend some time with her. My wife, Lauren's, coming with me. We're kind of treating this as a kind of a little mini honeymoon because we haven't had a lot of time to enjoy to ourselves post the wedding. So have Irish Breakdown to thank for that. But it's going to be an awesome weekend. And, you know, before we know it, football season is going to come to an end, unfortunately. Those 12 guaranteed opportunities that Marcus Freeman was talking about, it's almost up, which is weird to think about. It feels like it was just a couple weeks ago that we were sitting down talking about how hostile of an environment Kyle Field is and how crazy it's going to be if Notre Dame can go in there and pull off the win as 3-point dogs.
Doesn't that seem like so long ago now? It really does.
It's wild. It seems like so long ago, but it wasn't, but it was. You know, the season's had a lot of this, right? It's had a lot of this. Lately, it's been a lot of this. It's been on the upward trend.
Well, just college football in general, Trevor, it's just been a wild season so far.
Yeah, it's been crazy. I mean, every Saturday there's a game that we aren't predicting that we end up having to turn on and say, yo, are you seeing this? So-and-so might lose. You know, LSU might be losing for a third time in a row. Yeah. Or, you know.
I was so tough to watch. But they're playing a lot of young guys. You know, you can't win when you play a lot of young. Oh, wait, never mind.
Yeah, I was about to say it's tough when you're down to your third string Viper and a true freshman corner and a true freshman left tackle. And those are tough.
Hard to win that way. Yeah,
it is.
To win that way.
It is. Yeah. It's really tough. Yeah. But before we jump into it today, Brian.
I love how seriously you say sarcastic things.
Thank you.
It is very funny. It is well done, my friend. Well done.
Thank you. Yeah. I appreciate that. On the topic of other serious things, football season is coming to a close, unfortunately, which makes this no better time than to sign up with Notre Dame's new friends over at MyBookie. So before the regular season of college football ends, be sure that you go and you sign up with MyBookie using promo code IRISH. What that's going to do for you, you guys know what it is. It's going to double your deposit bonus. You throw in $10 into your account, MyBookie is going to credit you with $10 worth of bonus bets. So make sure you get all those squeezed in before the final regular season games for college football come to a close. And as always, Notre Dame, they play Army on Saturday. I think the line right now is set at 12.5. The last time I looked, I could be off, but I think it's somewhere around 12.5. So make sure to throw down some bets on Notre Dame. NFL's
up to 14.
Okay. Spreads up to 14. Make sure you keep that in mind for when you're throwing down bets with MyBookie. Be sure to enroll in their loyalty rewards program. It's going to earn you extra cash just for placing some bets. So before the regular season is over in college football, the NFL is still going on. No better time to sign up with MyBookie. It's a sports book that gives you control and rewards you for every moment of play.
So with that in mind, Trevor, let's dive into, speaking of some big games, there's some big games coming up for Notre Dame on the schedule this year, but there's also some pretty big games that are coming up here for Notre Dame in the future. We had an article out today at irishbreakdown.com, which is, by the way, for all of you, no matter where our website. So if you're new, you understand this. We have basically 3 different entities at Irish Breakdown. We have the podcast, which is the YouTube channel and the podcast. We have the website where all of our free content goes. That's at irishbreakdown.com. And then, of course, you have our premium message board at boards@irishbreakdown.com. Our website, our free website, has been affiliated with Sports Illustrated at one point in time. And then Athlon Sports is who it's currently affiliated with. And we'll see who we're affiliated with in the future. But here's the thing. When you bookmark it, don't bookmark whatever the URL is for whatever the current site we're located with. Bookmark www.irishbreakdown.com, because no matter where we go, irishbreakdown.com is our link that we have that will redirect you to wherever the site will be, and maybe someday it'll just be irishbreakdown.com. You never know, Trev. So we shall see, but just wanted to let some people know that. I got a message on the board. Hey, I wasn't sure how to find the website. Also, if you are a premium board member, if you just go to ib.com at the top left of the page and just click on that, it'll take you to the homepage for all the free content. But if you're a premium member, we put all of our written content on the premium board with the text included, so you don't have to click on the article and deal with the advertisements. But we all also appreciate that, because that helps us to continue to grow our business as well. So being a premium member, but we put that on the board today, Trevor. And I always bring that up because I've had multiple people the last couple weeks like, I can't find your website. Have you guys written an article in the last 2 months? And I'm like, yeah, they're still going to the old URL. And I'm like, yes, we are. And so that's what's going on there. But today we had an article about Notre Dame announced today that they have a game coming up against Texas, and it's going to be a home and home series in 2028 and 2029. And so Notre Dame, and we've seen this recently. Obviously, Notre Dame had a recent home and home, but they're in 2028. Notre Dame is going to have a home game against Texas, and a week later they're going to have a home game against Arkansas. So the first 4 weeks of the season, Trevor, are already scheduled so far. They now have 9 games scheduled for 2028. And then in 2029, Notre Dame is going to go to Texas on September 22nd. So they will start that season with Alabama. And then 1, 2, 3 weeks later, they will go down to Texas and play the Longhorns in Darrell K. Royal Stadium. Notre Dame also has 9 games slated for that season. We don't yet know if the Notre Dame USC rivalry will continue, because that is not extended at the present moment. So we'll see kind of how that one goes. But, Trev, it was an interesting one because you obviously love that Notre Dame's trying to schedule tough opponents. I believe they have a home and home coming up soon with Florida. They have a home and home that they just announced, or they have one with Florida also, Alabama. What was the one that they just announced a couple weeks ago? I'm drawing a complete blank. It's like 2023 or 2032 or something like that. Hold on a second. What was the one that they announced recently? We just talked about it. It was not Florida, because it wasn't an ACC team. It was
Was that Florida? Was that when they scheduled
the home? No, that one's been announced a while. That's been announced for a while. Was it
okay.
20? Trying to find it. Clemson's on there. The Florida one's been announced for a while. That was announced a year ago. I'm trying to find what game that was announced. That they're going to be playing here down the road. They do have Michigan coming back on the schedule in 2033. So that's going to be a new one that's going to be coming on there. So yeah, it's going to be interesting, Trevor, to kind of see what the schedule looks like here down the road. They play SMU here in 2026. So maybe it was the Florida, but I remember the Florida one being announced a while ago, and I'm just drawing a complete blank on what the series is that's coming up here down the road. But I'll tell you this, Trevor. I've said this before. I think Notre Dame and Texas should play at least twice every 10 years, if not 3 to 4 times. I could see a scenario where it's like, okay, once every 10 years, you have 2 games against Texas, home and home, and then once during that period, you guys play on neutral field somewhere, something like that. I think that would be pretty cool to see. But Notre Dame, Texas, 2028, 2029. Just initial thoughts, Trev, and then I'm going to talk just briefly about sort of the history between these two football teams.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, first and foremost, it's a bad day to be a person who claims that Notre Dame doesn't play anybody. It's tough to be in that crowd today. I put out a tweet earlier today before the show started just about all of the notable opponents that Notre Dame has from 2025 down to 2030, and that list is continuing to grow. Obviously, a lot of the schedules are not finalized yet, but you look at 2028, they're playing Texas, Arkansas, Clemson. In 2029, they play Alabama, at Texas, at NC State, at Florida State. So Notre Dame is doing what you want a top-tier program to do. I'm with you, man. I love when Notre Dame goes and plays other historic college football programs, right? It makes for a lot of fun. Yeah. I mean, the last time Notre Dame and Texas played in a home and home in 2015, Notre Dame decimated them. I think it was 38-3. And then in 2016, unfortunately, Notre Dame lost that game, but that was one of the most exciting games that I have.
Very entertaining game.
I wish I could say it's one of my favorite Notre Dame games to watch. It can't because they lost, and I'm never going to say a loss is awesome to win or to watch, but that game's crazy. Yeah, I mean, a block extra point to tie the game, goes into overtime. Yeah, it was a crazy game.
I do think there can be a point where you're like, okay, you're playing too many of those type of teams in a season, and I do worry about that a little bit with some of these future schedules. 2029, you already have Alabama. You already play at Florida State. Now you play at Texas. You might have USC also on the schedule at that point in time. You look at 2000, and I think it was 2031 was a bit of a – I mean, again, you don't know how these teams are going to be, but 2031, you've got to play at Clemson. You play Florida. You play Miami. You might also have North Carolina. So, I mean, sometimes you can say, like, okay, we get a little too carried away, but I think the 2028 schedule will be fine. I'm good with that one. That'll be because I want a challenging schedule. And this year was supposed to be a challenging schedule. If USC and Florida State were their traditional good programs – that they are, we're talking a lot differently about this schedule than we have in the past, but we'll see how it goes. But it's so hard to get too worked up about schedules as far as like, I can't believe they're playing Texas and Clemson and Miami, and at Virginia Tech and Arkansas, and they might have to play USC that year. And, 2028 will be a year where you got to play them on the road. And it's like, well, you have no clue how good USC is going to be in 2028. You have no clue how good Texas is going to be in 2028. It was always hard to project that far ahead. It's even more challenging now with the portal and those type of things. And so, it's
the thing that I like about what Notre Dame's doing with their schedule is they are giving themselves a greater opportunity to playing a quality opponent than if they were going through and scheduling a bunch of, I guess you could say, lesser or higher profile football teams, right? IU is kind of an anomaly in that they are a perennial struggling program. They're having an amazing year this year, but you can't expect that out of a bunch of middle to lower tier teams. And so at least Notre Dame is giving themselves the opportunity to where, the way that I look at it, there's more of a chance of Alabama and Texas being good in 2029 than there is of Northwestern turning it around in 2029 and being a perennial powerhouse. So who knows? But I'm with you. I do think that there's a limit. And I think with some of these future schedules down the road, like you're kind of getting there of like, okay, you have 4 to 5 really good quality opponents. Don't really need to be adding a bunch more. But I think it's good for the sport. I think it's good for Notre Dame. And like I said, it bodes well for their strength of schedule down the road.
So, Trev, when you look at the history between Notre Dame and Texas, we'll just kind of wrap up with this real quick. I do like this rivalry. I don't know why. I haven't seen a lot of these games, but I just kind of feel like these are two very traditional powers with very unique looks, with a interesting history. You know, Notre Dame has a 9-3 all-time lead over Texas. The Irish won the first two matchups, which were actually in Austin. And then in 1913 and 1915. In the 1934, it was played in South Bend, and Texas won that game. The next game was in 1952 in Austin. Notre Dame won that game. It wasn't until 1954, which was the fifth matchup, that a home team won that game. And then if you're an old school person and you grew up in the era before me, so these games all got played before me, but I remember talking to Lou Emoji about some of these games, and that from 1969 to 1977, Notre Dame and Texas played three times in the Cotton Bowl, and Texas won the first matchup, which was at the end of the 69 season, and they won that one 21-17. And then a year later, they played in the Cotton Bowl. Notre Dame won 24-11. And then at the end of the 1977 season, Trevor, I'm not sure if you're familiar with the season, but Notre Dame was ranked fifth. We did talk about it, I believe, recently. Notre Dame was ranked fifth. Texas was ranked number one. And Notre Dame absolutely destroyed Texas 38-10. And that and some other results vaulted Notre Dame up to number one, and they won their national championship that season under Dan Devine. The Irish won the next three matchups. They beat Texas and South Bend 55-27 in 1995. And then in 1996, Notre Dame went down and beat Texas. I believe Jim Sanson hit a game-winning field goal in that particular game. And then we had the 15 and 16 rivalries, or the matchup. So I do like these, and this kind of puts them at about a little over 10 years since the last game. With the expanded playoff, there's a much greater chance that they can play in bowl games now, because it was a lot harder for Notre Dame and Texas to ever play again in a bowl game unless it was a playoff game, or because of the bowl tie-ins. There's a lot more the tie-in, so it's a lot harder for certain teams from certain leagues to ever play each other. Now with the 12-team playoff, that will eventually, before this series takes on, will probably expand to 14 or 16 teams. We'll see. We'll kind of see that potentially more matchups between them. But as far as getting them in your own stadium and things like that, I mean, maybe it happens this year if Texas loses to A&M. Maybe they fall down and got to come to South Bend. But now we know for a fact that they'll play the next 10 years. They'll play Alabama in the next 10 years. They'll play Florida in the next 10 years. They're going to play Michigan in the next 10 years. So Notre Dame continue to do what Notre Dame has always done, which is try to play those traditional powers, which, as we talked about, they tried to do this year. A&M lived up to their end of the bargain, but Florida State and USC did not. And there aren't a lot of teams that play that type of schedule. You get one of the best traditional programs on the East Coast in Florida State. You get one of the best traditional powers on the West Coast in USC, or the best traditional power in the West Coast in USC. And then you play, one of the traditional powerhouses in the Southwest in Texas A&M. So it was an attempt by Notre Dame to play a tough schedule. It's just other people didn't live up to their end of the bargain. But certainly we will hopefully see that when Notre Dame plays Texas. So, Trev, let's dive into the next part of the show today. And we had some fun talking about that Texas and Notre Dame rivalry. And they've only got 9 games in those 2 years, so we'll see more games added. We'll find out, is Notre Dame and Stanford going to continue their series? Will Notre Dame and USC continue their series? A lot they'll have to find out. But what we do know right now is that Notre Dame has a huge opportunity in front of it now. And when you look at this Navy game, look, it's kind of funny. We talked how we liked about how I remember this offseason. I don't know if you were part of those shows, but I know with myself and Vince, and we talked this summer about how, Army was an interesting team because they're coming off of a 6-6 campaign in which they did not go to a bowl game. And the reason they didn't go to a bowl game is because I believe this is why, but 2 of their wins were over FCS opponents. They beat Holy Cross and they beat Delaware State. And I believe you need a certain number of wins over FBS teams to qualify for a bowl game. Army didn't get that. They're in a little bit of a transition. They're going from being an independent to being in the AAC. This is their first year in the AAC. But when you looked at how Texas finished the year last year, Trev, they beat Air Force by 20, beat Holy Cross, beat Coastal Carolina, and then ended the season with a win over Navy. And you say, this might be a decent team. You got a lot coming back. They were kind of going back to more of a traditional option offense where they tried some other stuff last year. And then lo and behold, Army is the team that you look at and you say, who would have guessed that coming into the season, a November 23rd game against Army would be a huge opportunity for Notre Dame to boost its playoff resume. Like, I did not have that on my bingo card. That's for sure, Trevor. But here's the interesting conversation that we're seeing. And I want to make sure that we all understand, like, hey, there's a lot that Notre Dame still has to do and prove before we start talking about the playoffs. And I know that there's this assumption that, and the reason I get nervous about it is because what I'm starting to hear from national people and Notre Dame fans, and I'm even falling into this trap a little bit myself, is, hey, y'all, this was a lot of what people were saying after Notre Dame beat A&M. Well, you look at their schedule, and there's nobody on their schedule that should beat Notre Dame. They got a shot to go to – I mean, I literally heard people on TV say this. They're going to run the table. They're a playoff team. Sign them up for being a playoff team. And then a week later, something bad happened, and you lost to a team you shouldn't have lost to. So Notre Dame still has a lot to play for. And I think the fact that Marcus Freeman still brings that up each and every week hopefully helps Notre Dame in this matchup. But we'll get into the specifics of the Army game here in a second, Trevor. But the reality is this Notre Dame football team still has a lot to prove these next 2 weeks, and it begins with Army. And it's going to be that tough East Coast 1 week all the way out to the West Coast the next week. You know, that travel, there's all those things built in, which Notre Dame is used to. They've done this a lot of different times. And, you know, there's still a lot on the table because Notre Dame, Trevor, cannot afford to drop another game. I don't – look, I've said it before. I don't think the schedule is as soft as some people make it out to be. Now, there's not any elite teams on it, but there's a really high level quality of solid to really good opponents on there, more than a lot of teams play. Where a lot of teams will play 2 to 3 really tough games and a lot of garbage. Notre Dame doesn't have really the 2 or 3 tough games, but there's a lot of quality opponents on there. And that makes it challenging. But it's not the kind of schedule, in my opinion, Trevor, because of how Florida State's down, because USC's down, because Louisville had that big upset. I don't believe it's a schedule, barring massive upsets the next 2 weeks, where Notre Dame at 10-2 will get in or even deserves to get in, to be honest with you. So forget what the committee might do. I don't think a 10-2 Notre Dame team against that schedule deserves to be in the playoffs. So there is still a lot at stake for Notre Dame these next 2 weeks. They can't coast and say, hey, look, we're in, we're fine, we're good, there's nothing to worry about. Let's book our travel plans for this weekend and that weekend and all that. There's still a lot to play for these next 2 games, and it begins this weekend with Army. So there's still a lot for this football team to prove, Trev.
Kind of gives you a little PTSD and flashback to the handling success conversation. You know, I've been hearing it too. I've been seeing what people are putting out there on Twitter and what people are saying on, ESPN, various sports outlets of, now it's coming to the crunch time of the regular season of college football, like we've talked about. And people are just kind of writing off, who they think is just going to be the shoe-in for the playoff, no matter what, depending on what happens with the rest of the regular season. And Notre Dame is in discussion for being one of those teams. People go and look, it's like, yes, Army's ranked, but, they should win. Kind of the similar conversation with what it was with Navy, and USC right now is having a down year. So despite what we believe, like from an analytical standpoint, Notre Dame should win both of these games. They also should have beaten Northern Illinois, right? So now that conversation of how are you going to handle success once again, because now Notre Dame is riding an 8-game win streak where really none of the games have been close. Can we all agree on that? Yes, Louisville was 31-24, but Notre Dame led for 53 and a half minutes of that game and never trailed outside of the first quarter, I believe, because they tied it up at one point. So I just, again, Notre Dame is going to have to exhibit what Marcus Freeman has been talking about of being able to handle success and putting the noise behind them and just taking care of business within your program and being fundamentally sound and blocking out the noise and playing your standard of football. And I think that's going to be some of the things that are on display for Notre Dame over the next 2 weeks, because that's what it needs to be. That is what is at stake at Notre Dame, big picture, because we've seen it this year. I'm not alluding to 22 Stanford or 23 Clemson or 23. I'm talking about September 7th of this year. We have seen what happens when this Notre Dame football program kind of lets the outside noise start to creep in a little bit too much. And so over the next couple of weeks, we're going to really see what lessons that they have learned from those weeks, because Marcus Freeman's very adamant. almost every press conference, every post-game press conference, he alludes back to, I remind the team all the time about September 7th. And I talk about, we know what it looks like when we don't prepare and we just kind of assume that we have everything locked up. So what I'm going to be looking for over the next, call it 18 days from Notre Dame, is that mindset of we are locked in. It's a faceless opponent. We still have things that we have to improve on. And if we play our standard of football, we'll take care of business and the chips will kind of fall where they should. But I agree. There is still a lot at stake here for Notre Dame, despite what the national media might say. And that, like I said, a little PTSD from the start of the season. But here's to hoping that the coaching staff and the boys in blue have learned their lesson. You know what I mean?
I definitely do, Trevor. There's no doubt about that. Couple things about this too is I know there's going to be some Notre Dame fans that don't want to hear this, and I don't really care because it doesn't matter what you think. It doesn't matter what I think. It matters what the committee thinks. And the reality is the committee put Army in their first playoff ranking. They have them in their second playoff ranking. And the reality is the committee clearly thinks this is a good football team. Otherwise, they wouldn't have them in their top 25. So the other part about this too, Trevor, is this is a statement opportunity for Notre Dame. And the other unique thing is a lot of people keep talking about how challenging the SEC schedules have been and compared to Notre Dame or Iowa or Penn State. And they're correct. I mean, I think the top SEC teams, I would argue, have all played tougher schedules. Not all. Most have played tougher schedules than what Notre Dame and Oregon and Penn State have played. Is certainly the only team to me in the North that has had their schedule play out to where there's some top heavy teams on there is end up going to be Ohio State. I would argue that there's a big drop off between the top 4 teams that Ohio State plays and everybody else, but that's a different conversation for a different day. I think between playing Oregon, between playing Indiana, between playing Penn State and playing what has turned out to be a pretty quality Iowa team, not a great Iowa team, but a pretty quality Iowa team, that's a challenging schedule that has shaped up to be tougher than Notre Dame's at the top. Again, I would argue the middle is tougher for Notre Dame, but your schedule is ultimately going to be defined by how good it is at the top. And that's certainly true of a lot of those SEC teams. I mean, a lot of these SEC schedules I look at and I'm just like, dude, just shut up about that being a tough schedule. Like some Notre Dame fan on Twitter today is like, well, if Notre Dame played LSU's schedule, they'd have more losses. And I'm like, shut up. Like they lost to Florida, who lost to an ACC team 41-17. Everybody talks about how ACC sucks, right? They lost to USC, who sucks. They lost by 15 to a team that Notre Dame beat by 10 on that very field, right? Like just stop with that. Some of those schedules are not challenging. Texas does not have a super challenging schedule. LSU did not have a super challenging schedule. Ole Miss does not have a super challenging schedule. Georgia does. That is legit. Not only do they play at Alabama, at Ole Miss, they play home against Tennessee, and then they play at Texas. They also played Clemson on a neutral field at the beginning of the season. Now, neutral field being played in Atlanta, but if anyone knows where Clemson, South Carolina is in relation to Athens, that's not too far for Clemson fans to travel to. Like I flew first time I went to Clemson, actually flew into Atlanta, drove through Athens on my way to South Carolina. It wasn't that far of a trip. But that's a really challenging schedule. Alabama, in my opinion, played a very challenging schedule. When you look at the teams that they've had to play this season, in conference and out of conference, obviously played at Wisconsin in the non-conference, played against a pretty quality Western Kentucky team out of conference that's currently sitting there at 7-3. They played a South Florida team that's 5-5, quality AAC team, middle of the road AAC team. It's not like playing Prairie View A&M. You know what I mean? I'm not saying like, oh my God, Bama signed them up for the title because they played South Florida. I'm saying is they didn't play any teams that are just like they can roll the ball out and they're going to win by 50. They had to play well to dominate, and they did. They played Wisconsin. They had to play Georgia. They had to play at Tennessee. They had to play at LSU. They had to play at Oklahoma, which is going to turn out to not be a very tough game. The home game against South Carolina turns out to be a lot tougher than it was, and the game at Vanderbilt turned out to be a lot tougher than people thought it was going to be because the Commodores are a quality football team. So you can point to the Mercer game all you want. That's fine. That's no different, in my opinion, than Notre Dame playing Tennessee State last year. But the reality is when you play that schedule, I'm good if you want to play Mercer late in the season. When you play Wisconsin on the road out of schedule, you got to play Georgia, you got to play Tennessee, you got to play the teams that they had to play. That's a challenging schedule. some of the SEC schedules are a little overrated, but I will say this, Trevor. Here's the interesting thing about it, though. For the most part, outside of Texas, who is in a unique situation compared to Notre Dame, all those tough games in the SEC have already been played. Like, there really aren't a lot of show-me opportunities left for the SEC. Texas has one. They play Kentucky this weekend, for example. Kentucky stinks. They're 4-6. They lost 4 of their last 5. Their only win was over Murray State. That's not a super challenging game. Then they play at Texas A&M. That'll be a tough game, but they kind of got to, if they lose that game, they're going to fall behind Notre Dame, in my opinion, because Notre Dame would have a better record and Notre Dame will have beaten a common opponent, right? But, so Texas will have a chance to earn their keep. But if they went out there in the SEC title game, it doesn't matter. So then you look at what – so they don't have a great schedule left, although they probably have the best so far. Ole Miss plays at Florida this weekend. Now, Florida's playing better, but that's still a 5-5 football team. And then they play Mississippi State, who's not very good, 2-8. Tennessee plays UTEP this weekend, and then at Vanderbilt. That's not – I mean, yeah, it'd be nice to beat Vanderbilt on the road if you're them, but it's not like a committee's going to move you from 13 to 9 because you beat Vanderbilt. And especially depending on how Vanderbilt does this weekend, Vanderbilt plays LSU this weekend. There's a chance Vanderbilt 6-5 and have losers of 3 of their last 4 when they host Tennessee. Georgia plays UMass and Georgia Tech this weekend, and then Alabama plays at Oklahoma and home against Auburn. And I know some people talk about Auburn. It's not about whether it's going to be so some of you understand this. None of those games are needle moving games. Now, some are going to, a rivalry game and Auburn's this. Guys, this isn't about whether it's going to be a tough game or not. It's about whether it's a resume builder. And Alabama beating Auburn, that may end up being a tough game, just like USC may end up being a tough game for Notre Dame because it's a rivalry game, but it doesn't move the needle because Auburn stinks. They stink. So if Alabama beats them, it doesn't do anything for Alabama's resume. And when you compare that to Notre Dame, the at USC game shouldn't be necessarily a huge needle mover, but for whatever reason, Trevor, the computers love USC and the voters love Army. So if you look at Notre Dame's final 2 games, they actually have more statement opportunities than those Big Ten those SEC teams that are trying to compete with them to get ahead. You know what I mean? So when I look at that, Trevor, that matters too. And so not only do you have a chance for yourself, win and you're in type of thing, and Notre Dame is. I think they're in. If they win out, they're in. The only thing that matters is seeding. But you have a chance if you can make a statement against Army, and winning obviously matters, but make a statement where you convincingly beat them, whatever that margin looks like, you almost make it impossible for the committee to justify putting the SEC teams behind them, above them, which matters when it comes to your seeding, getting a home playoff game, and what caliber team you not only get in round 1, but who you're playing in round 2. And if you're number 7, you're either playing the Big Ten champ or the SEC champ. If you just jump up 1 spot to number 6, now all of a sudden you're either playing the ACC champ, the Big 12 champ, or the Group of 5 Mountain West champ. So it may not seem like much, but going from 7, and this is what I think has made this so interesting, going from 7 to 6 has mattered quite a bit now than maybe we might have thought beforehand. Oh, you're still at home. It matters a lot more now. And that's what's at stake for Notre Dame when they go out there and play Army. Not just you've got to win to continue rolling, but if you can make a statement, now if you win out, you give yourself an opportunity to maybe climb up more than some of these other teams. And you look at Penn State, for example, who is a team Notre Dame is chasing. Well, yeah, they're ahead of Notre Dame now, but they play at Minnesota this weekend, who's 6-4 and coming off a loss to Rutgers. And they have to play at Wisconsin. So if they lose to Penn State and Wisconsin to end the season, all of a sudden they're 6-6. That doesn't look like an impressive win. And then Penn State gets Maryland at home. Maryland is 4-6 and has lost 5 of their last 6 games. And just recently lost to Rutgers, and they get Iowa at home this weekend. So, there's a chance they're 4-7 going into play. They don't have a chance to really bolster their resume either. Notre Dame is one of the few teams outside of like Indiana, Ohio State, and then the teams that play in the conference championships to have sort of a statement win this last 2 games, because a lot of the tough stuff has already happened which means Notre Dame gets that prime opportunity where there's not a lot of, the Notre Dame Army games getting drowned out by LSU, Bama, or Georgia, Bama, Georgia, Tennessee, Georgia, Texas, Ohio State, Oregon. It's not getting drowned. Ohio State, Penn. It's not getting drowned out by those games. First of all, because for whatever reason, the Fox News puts all those Ohio State games on at noon, so they don't get to play night games really that much. But there's just not that other big game that's going to draw eyes away from Notre Dame. And it's one of the few ranked versus ranked matchups of the weekend, Trevor, that if Notre Dame can win, because again, Indiana and Ohio State plays at noon. That game will be over for hours by the time they play. And as I look through the schedule, there are no other ranked versus ranked games. 2 weeks before the end of the season, there's 2 ranked versus ranked games. And that one of them is Notre Dame and Army. So it's a great opportunity to make a statement. Big opportunity.
You know how weird it is thinking that at the end of the college football season, with the first 12-team playoff kind of looming in the background, 2 of the 3 remaining needle-moving games in the rest of the college football regular season is Notre Dame and Army and Ohio State and Indiana. You know how weird that just talking about the grand scheme of how crazy this football season has been. If you would have told me at the start of the season that, IU and Ohio State was going to be a top 5 matchup and Army versus Notre Dame was going to be a needle-moving top 25 matchup, I would have said you were crazy. And here we are. We're living in this crazy reality of how wild the college football season has been this year. But I agree with you. I mean, those outside of the Texas A&M game, those are the final 2 ranked needle-moving games. And I'm happy that you touched on the rivalry portion, because there's a lot of people that I've also seen, Michigan and Ohio State will still have implications because it is the game. And it's like, well, yeah, but Michigan is at best going to be 6-5 going into that game in Columbus. And Ohio State's not going to get any recognition from the committee for beating a Michigan team that they should handily beat this season. Right? Not to take away from the fact that, they've lost the last 3 years. Yeah, understandable, but that has nothing to do with this season. And it's the same thing with Notre Dame USC. So I'm glad that you touched on that, because the same thing with Alabama Auburn. Yes, the Iron Bowl and the game versus that team up north is always going to have implications from just a foundational rivalry standpoint, but it's not as far as this playoff committee is concerned. So going to be interested to see what happens the rest of the season.
And for Ohio State too, they're one of those teams where they don't need to do anything but win. If they just win the rest of their games, there's nowhere for them to go from where they are right now. If they win the rest of their games, they're the number 1 seed. I mean, it's it doesn't. They're one of the few teams, Oregon and Ohio State, more than anybody, are 2 teams that are 100% in control of their own destinies. You win out, you're the number 1 seed. If either one of those 2 teams went out, they're the number 1 seed. Like that, and should be, especially Ohio State, in my opinion. But so I look at it, Trev. I mean, that's how you nailed it. There's a lot. They're going to be great games. I think there's going to be a lot of good football. Georgia Tech should be a good football game. But I don't, that's why I say tomorrow night's rankings are going to matter so much, because depending on where Notre Dame is and if any SEC teams go ahead of them. But this is an opportunity. You look at, like you mentioned, the Big Ten. You talk about Penn State. What Notre Dame playing USC may not matter a whole lot, big picture, but it kind of does, because if, let's just say, last week Penn State was 4, Notre Dame was 8. Number 6 loss, number 7 loss. And so Notre Dame moves up to 6. Let's say that's what happens tonight. Penn State's still 4, Notre Dame is 6. Indiana loses to Ohio State. All of a sudden, Notre Dame's 5 and Penn State's 4. If Notre Dame goes out there that last game and beats USC by 24 in the same field where Penn State beat them by 3, maybe that's enough to flip them. And that's why I say Notre Dame still has a lot to play for in these last 2 games. It's not like, we are where we are who we are. Let's just get in the playoff and then we can go prove ourselves. There's a lot of movement still left to be left to have these next couple weeks. There's just not as many. A lot of those games have been played that put us where we are now. But because of the unique situation where, now again, this could change tomorrow depending on what the committee does with Georgia and Bama and Ole Miss behind Notre Dame. But if those teams remain behind Notre Dame, then you're in a situation now where Notre Dame has more opportunities to build their resume than does, like, what are they going to say? Well, Alabama beat Auburn. Yeah, so did Cal. So what? At Auburn, you know what I mean? Like, that's a middle of the road, maybe might not go to a bowl game ACC team. You know what I mean? So maybe a tough game, but it's not going to be a needle mover, where Notre Dame has sort of like Notre Dame beating USC by 24 doesn't matter in relationship to their resume compared to Georgia or Alabama. It does with Penn State. And that's what's going to make these last two games very interesting, Trev. And that's what Notre Dame's playing for. You're playing for a chance to compete for a championship. And that's a selling point. And you can't play for that championship if you don't need to be thinking about the championship. That's your goal. But fellas, there's nothing more important to you than Army right now, because it's like, did you watch that SEC short skit, by the way, for this week? It was really funny. SEC shorts. So they had their video out this week, and it's the playoff committee treehouse, or the playoff treehouse. And so they have all the different people, all the different short shirts and stuff. And there's the Notre Dame guy, and they use that tall, skinny, nerdy guy that played the Pac-12 during the COVID year, which annoyed me, but whatever. But anyway, they had it to where something like the Notre Dame guy says, like, look, if we just all went out, we're all good, we're all fine. And all of a sudden they showed somebody's zeroing in with a rifle scope on Notre Dame, and it's an Army guy saying, we've got the shot. You know what I mean? It's like, but it was so true, because it's like, dude, he nailed it. Like, it's funny. I'm kind of getting tired of the Northern Illinois thing they did, but in relation to Army, it's like, dude, that's so true. You're in the playoff right now, but that Army team is sitting there saying, we got a chance to do something here and make our statement. Because here's the crazy thing. Army's playing for a potential playoff berth as well. Because if they beat Notre Dame, they're going to skyrocket up the rankings and be undefeated. And then if they go beat Tulane in a couple weeks in the AAC championship, who's also ranked, now all of a sudden the Big 12 champ, one ACC champ, depending on what happens these last two games, may be having to look over their shoulders for Army. Boise can't afford to lose. If Boise gets beat, now Army can leap them. So they're actually playing for a playoff spot. And that's what makes it a really fascinating game, Trevor. So everything that Notre Dame wants to accomplish this season is in front of it. They just got to handle business. But handling business may not be as easy as what a lot of the national media are making it seem to be. And that's why I was glad that the committee actually has Army in. I didn't think they were going to put Army in, to be completely honest with you, but they did. And that certainly benefits Notre Dame. So you've got to win, but I think you also have to win where it's very easy. Not easy, where it's very obvious that you're the better team. Like, I think that matters in my view, Trev. So certainly. And that's kind of the last thing I need is, Trev, what kind of statement do you think that Notre Dame needs to make this weekend to solidify itself, where your victory doesn't give any, removes any thought that voters may have to leap one of those two-loss SEC teams ahead of you?
Yeah, the statement Notre Dame has to make this weekend is they just have to remove doubt, right? If you go back through and you watch some of Notre Dame's past games, there's things that you can allude to kind of poke holes in what Notre Dame has done, albeit it has been impressive. Since September 7th, Notre Dame has gone on the best run that they've gone on under Marcus Freeman, right? They're putting up over 30 points a game in every single game except for the Miami of Ohio game. The margins of victory just aren't even in the Miami of Ohio game, where they didn't score over 30, they still won by 25, right? So they're doing things, I don't want to call it a historic pace, but like at a very impressive rate. But there's things that you can allude to back to every single game where you're like, yeah, but. And that to me is kind of the statement that they can make against Army. Yes, you beat Virginia at home by 21 points. In my opinion, you also left 20 points out on the field. You go, well, they beat Florida State by 49. Yeah, Florida State is terrible. They should have beat them by 49, right? Then you go back through and you start thinking, okay, well, Navy was good. You forced those turnovers, but then there's still people that can poke holes. Well, Blake Horvath had half a thumb on his throwing hand, and they still gave up large chunk plays to Blake Horvath. And You go back through and you say, well, they beat Georgia Tech, who just beat Miami. It's like, yeah, well, they didn't have Haynes King. So what's at stake for Notre Dame is, one, it's their final ranked opponent that they can play this season. And two, they have yet to play. Navy was close. I would say it is the closest that they have played to a complete game this season. But a really sound, convincing win from, the first whistle to the last whistle will put Notre Dame in a position where the committee looks at them and they can actually say, like, what team is going to beat them right now? There's some that could on paper, but on the flip side, you can also say, but what team does Notre Dame lose to? That's how close college football is this year. But there's been games in the past where it's like, yeah, they look great, but yes, they won by 35, but, So for me, as simply as it put, what's at stake for Notre Dame, the statement that they have to make is removing the doubt, removing the but this happened. So
right.
That's going to be huge.
Right. Yeah, it's going to be fun, Trev. I kind of like that. I'll be honest with you. I kind of like that this game matters because I get so increasingly frustrated by the whole we shouldn't play service academies anymore if we're Notre Dame thing. And I just love the fact that, beating Army in Yankee Stadium gives Notre Dame an opportunity to solidify their standing in the postseason, which I think is kind of pretty cool. And then we're going to find out, obviously Army has another big game coming up after Notre Dame. Trev, they've got after they play UTSA, I believe they've actually clinched. I think the AAC championship's already been determined who's going to play. I'm pretty sure because everybody else in the league has 2 losses except for Tulane and Army. So I believe they've both clinched because Tulane hasn't lost a game in their league either. Their 2 losses were non-conference to Kansas State and Oklahoma. And Army doesn't have any losses, and they only have 1 conference game left. So even if they lose to UTSA, they're in the AAC championship. But if they beat UTSA, then obviously they're going to go into that game with they're going to go 10-1 record and have a chance to beat a ranked team. So even if Army falls out of the top 25 for some reason, there's a good chance if they can beat Tulane, which won't be easy, Navy found out this weekend, that they would jump back in at the end and once again be a team that could really help solidify Notre Dame's standing. But I still think at the end of the day, how you play Saturday is going to let people know, like, hey, we're out there, we're rolling. We're dominating teams. Like you mentioned, you played a sloppy game. You and I were talking last night, Trev, actually. I don't know if I called you. I think I called you because I was just watching it. And I'm like, dude, I was actually thinking about this. If 3 penalties don't get called, meaning you don't commit the penalties, Notre Dame has almost 600 yards of offense. Now, one of those would have been the 72-yard play. So even that or 78-yard play. So they had 448. Even if you just add that 78-yard play, that alone gets them to 526. And there was 2 other runs that got called back because of penalties that killed drives. So where I get to maybe 600 yards is if those drives extend, you maybe add another 40, 50, 60, 70 yards onto your final tally. And now all of a sudden, you look at it and you're like, wow, they beat Virginia 49 or 56-7, 56-14. And Notre Dame went out there and had almost 600 yards of offense. Because I know some people, so I think you said, Trev, that you thought this was going to be their best offensive performance of the season. And honestly, if it wasn't for the penalties, that's absolutely what it would have been. And that's what kind of made it so frustrating, to be completely honest with you, is that you did have those things. I mean, first drive of this third series, it's 7-0, and you get the ball at the 46-yard line going in, and your first play of the series, you get a holding penalty on a 5-yard gain. Jeremiah Love goes for 5 yards, you get a holding penalty, and it was a drive killer. Put you at 1st and 20 instead of 1st and 10. You're going in on the next series, and it's about to be a 3rd and 7 in a manageable situation. You get a holding penalty. Next thing you know, it's 2nd and 17, and Notre Dame's not able to get all that back. And you had the personal foul on the long penalty. There were so many things, Trevor. First play of the final drive of the third quarter, you have a 11-yard gain by Jadarian Price that gets called back by a running back holding penalty. Now, they ended up, get going a long drive and didn't score, but, who knows if that sparks them to not only score but have more time left to maybe punch another. There's just so many things like that where it wasn't Virginia making plays. It wasn't that you were missing reads or missing throws. It was silly penalties. And if you don't commit those things, and all of a sudden this is your best performance of the season. Now, here's the reality. You did those things. You did make those mistakes. But the point is, what we saw from Notre Dame was, outside of those dumb mistakes, a very explosive pass offense that called back some of those things, a very efficient run game. So if you're a member of the Irish Breakdown Premium Board on Champions Lounge, about 3:00 in the morning, I finished up my breakdown of the run game. And I was actually surprised, Trevor, at how efficient the run game was. This is one of the best. It ended up being one of the very best true rushing performances of the season when you look at from the standpoint of the actual run game. Because what I do when I break down the run game is I take out pass game scrambles because those aren't runs. But if you look at the numbers from the game, they actually had 31 carries for 205 yards, and they were over 60%, over 64% efficiency in the game. And it was a really impressive performance. I mean, the inside zone performance, they ran the inside zone, just base inside zone or inside zone lock. They ran that 11 times in the game and had 9 of those 11 runs were efficient runs. And they had 11 carries for 121 yards. And you just look at it and you're like, boy, that was a super efficient performance. Jeremiah Love's efficiency in this game on his runs was 81.3%. Like 60 is a good performance. And Jadarian Price was at 60. And Jeremiah was over 80, which meant he was getting the necessary yards and the results to be considered an efficient run. Incredibly efficient run. You still had your big plays. You had 2 of the best throws that Riley Leonard's made all season he made in this game, the 78-yard bomb, and then he ran through the exact same route later in the game where it wasn't as open. He had to fit it over a linebacker in front of a safety to Jaden Harrison for a 25-yard gain. That's where we keep saying is like, I know there's a lot of buts and almost, but the buts and almost now are so much closer to this team taking off than they were 2 months ago. You know, and that's the encouraging thing about it. But you just got to hope that this is the game where it finally clicks for Notre Dame, and that this offense can really finish on a very high note in these final 2 games. Because I think that's probably the one thing that still has some people second guessing this team is the offense really that good, or are they just beating up on bad teams because they have a truly elite defense, which they do. I mean, they have a truly elite defense.
Yeah. I think people are hesitant to deem Notre Dame as a good offense based on what happened last year, right? Notre Dame beat up on a lot of bad teams, and then they played teams with a halfway competent defense, and then the offense started putting up like 17 points a game, right? That's what happened in 2023. This year, however, the evolution of this offense went from, man, that's going to be a really good play if the left tackle holds up and if Leonard sees him and if they run the right route. And now it's,
if this guy doesn't get beat, if that guy doesn't get beat, if that guy doesn't make a bad read. Exactly.
Right. Like, which you could dissect any bad offense and say that. You know what I mean? Like, if you go back and say, well, if the quarterback reads him and if the running back picks up that pass pro and if the left guard doesn't get beat and if the wide receiver runs a better route, it's an awesome play. Well, yeah. You know what I mean? But now that evolution for Notre Dame has gone from that early on in the season to literally, if Pat Guggen doesn't grab a hold of that guy's face mask, it's a 78-yard touchdown pass. That's it. Right? Which is a correctable mistake. It is. You know,
much more so than your left tackle can't block anybody, or your right guard can't block anybody, or your tight end can't block anybody, or doesn't know how to get open, or it's different than that. And that's where they were in September. It was receivers can't get open. The O-line can't protect the quarterback. I mean, we're talking about the Louisville game where they basically stopped throwing the football because they couldn't protect on quick game.
Yep.
Now, they weren't great in pass pro on Saturday, but they were good enough to let a lot of big play opportunities happen, and that's still a concern I have moving forward. But the needle has moved big time for what the almost is. You know, it's like it used to be, well, if so-and-so didn't get hurt, so-and-so this, then this team would have been really good. Now it's if you just don't do that one thing you haven't done all year, you know, this thing is going to be fun.
Yeah, man. It's taking advantages of the opportunities that you have. Notre Dame had 5 drives on offense in the first half that resulted in 0 points. Just can't happen. Just can't happen, especially when you see what is ahead of you on the schedule. against a team like Army. North Texas had 6 offensive possessions in 4 quarters. That is crazy. So you got to take advantage of everything that you're able to do. And I think that is what's going to turn the heads for people for Notre Dame on offense. Defense is sound. Defense is what it is. And that's why everybody acknowledges it, because on most of their possessions, they hold them scoreless. Most of the time they have trouble. Opposing offenses have trouble getting past the 50-yard line. Yeah. So now the next step, which they are very close to, is Notre Dame scoring on the majority of all of their possessions. Not, first quarter they rattled off 1 touchdown on a short field, and then they ripped off 21 points in the second quarter, and then they scored 1 touchdown the entire second half. So it's just changing that a little bit. Now, I know it's unrealistic to say they should score 21 points every single quarter. It's like, well, yeah, but
sure. Totally reasonable to expect them to score 80 points a game. Totally.
Yeah. Yeah. 84 is totally on the table. Are you kidding me? But no, I mean, as long as Notre Dame is able to take advantage of the opportunities that they do have when the majority of the time when they do have the football, I think it's going to start looking a lot better for them easily.
So, Trevor, let's wrap up that part of it. We're going to start talking more about Army here in a second. But before we do, folks, hit that like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notification bell, share this podcast, give us a 5-star review. We'd greatly appreciate that. Tell your friends all about what we got going on here at Irish Breakdown. And of course, as always, make sure you sign up for the message board at boards.irishbreakdown.com. So, Trevor, listen, Notre Dame Army this weekend is a late season, week 13 battle between top 25 teams that still have a shot at the college football playoffs. If you'd have told me that during the interview process, Trevor, give me one prediction you have for the season. And if you'd have told me, Brian, I think the Notre Dame Army game is going to be a battle where Notre Dame might earn its second biggest win of the season, which could vault the Irish up in the playoff standings. And Army is actually going to have a shot to be in the playoffs at that time because they will be undefeated and beating every team by double digits. I'd have been like, thanks for the time. I wish you all the best. You take care. Keep listening to the show. I'd have thought you were nuts. I thought you were nuts. And here we are. November 19th, talking about this game, and that's exactly what's on the table. And it is very, very big opportunity for Notre Dame, and a lot of it comes down to not just what Notre Dame has done, but what Army has done. And I got to tell you, I've felt this way for a long time. I remember sitting in the press, like the post-game press conference in the Alamo Dome back in 2016, listening to Jeff Monken talk. And that's how long Jeff Monken's been at Army. He's been at Army for a very long time. And by the way, am I the only one that thinks that Jeff Monken looks like Mark Rogers? Am I the only one that thinks that? Right? I mean, I like, dude, seriously, right?
Yeah.
Throw an Army hat on Mark Rogers, and I'm telling you, they're cousins. But 2000s, his first year at Army was 2014. In that time, he has gone 117-71 at Army. Army, beginning with the COVID season, has had a 500 or better record every season. 2019, they were 5-8. The 2 years before that, Trev, they were 10-3 and 11-2. He has done a heck of a job. I'm sorry, he's 79-55 at Army. He was 38-16 at Georgia Southern. He's 117-71 in overall. But think about this. He's 24 games over 500 at Army. Like, that is such a great coaching job. The guy he replaced went 20-41 in 5 years before he got there at Army. The guy before him went 6-18 in his 2 years at Army. That's Stan Brock. Bobby Ross was there before that. Bobby Ross, who's won a national championship at Georgia Tech back in 1990. He went 9-25 in 3 years at Army. So that takes us all the way back to 2004. Todd Berry, who was the coach from 2000 to 2003, went 5-35. Do y'all know how bad the record for Army was the 30 years before Jeff Monken took over? Like, he has done such a tremendous job with that football team. And it's not like he's had a fluky year here or there. He went 4-8 in year 1, 2-10 in year 2. Since then, he's gone 8-5, 10-3, 11-2, 5-8, 9-3, 9-4, 6-6, 6-6, and they're currently 9-0. And this is their first year playing in a conference. Jeff Monken has done a phenomenal job, and Jeff Monken's another reason why I say I probably vote for Curt Cignetti for Coach of the Year, no matter what happens against Ohio State, unless they just get destroyed. My vote's probably still going to Curt Cignetti. But guys like Kalani Sitake and Jeff Monken have done absolutely phenomenal jobs with their football teams as well this season. And he's done it for a period of time. This is a darn good football coach. And you and I were talking before the game, you know, comparing them to Navy, and we both had some, I thought, some interesting takes on that. But when you look at Army this season, Trev, how they got to where they got to, they began the season against. Now, listen, they haven't played very many good teams, but they're doing what really good teams do to not very good teams, and that is they're destroying them. Lehigh to kick off the season, beat Lehigh 42-7. Went on the road, play Florida Atlantic 24-7. Come back home, play Rice, win that one 37-14. They beat Temple at Temple 42-14. Beat Tulsa at on the road 49-7. Destroyed Trent Dilfer 44 in UAB 44-10. Beat East Carolina 45-28. Played Air Force without their starting quarterback Bryson Daly, who's exceptional. Beat Air Force 20-3, and then this past weekend went on the road and beat a North Texas team that was 5-3 coming into that game 14-3, and did it without their offense doing a whole lot. To be honest with you, their defense won in this game, so they have been very, very impressive with what they've done this season for that level of a team. Now, my center saying like they're on the level as Notre Dame and Alabama, not saying that. This is a quality football team, Trevor, and they've earned the right to be in this conversation to say, hey, look, this is a big win and a big opportunity for Notre Dame. Now Notre Dame needs to go out there and kind of do what they need to do. But just watching this Army team, that's the first thing you notice. Two things you notice right away, Trev. This team is exceptionally well coached. And that's not just Jeff Monken. He's put together a staff that has this thing rolling. They do not beat themselves. You have to beat them. That's number one. And number two, the two biggest differences between Army and Navy, as I kick it to you, Trev, Navy's more athletic, Army's bigger and a lot more physical than what Navy was. They're very different. I mean, the schematic differences aren't as great as some people make them out to be. They are different, but that right there, bigger and more physical, is the biggest difference between what I saw when I watched film of Navy and when I watched film of Army. And that's on both sides of the ball.
Yeah, I mean, one, couldn't echo it enough about Jeff Monken as a head coach. Must be something in the DNA in that family. I saw somebody in the chat ask. He is the cousin. Yeah, he is the cousin of Todd Monken. So, I mean, Jeff Monken's a fantastic coach, man. Back at Georgia Southern, they beat Florida in the swamp in 2013. Now, 2013, Florida finished 4-8. It's also Georgia Southern. Like that's like the SEC, like FCS week that everybody, and they lost. Like, Jeff Monken is a really, really good football coach. Army's 9-0 for the first time since 1996. Army, this is the first time Army has been 9-0 since I've been born. That's crazy. You know what I mean? Like, it's a testament to coaching. You're absolutely right. And they're a very, very well-coached football team. They don't turn the ball over. They play really hard for their coach. But yeah, what jumps off the page absolutely is that they are an extremely physical football team. They fly downhill. They are not afraid to lay the lumber, man. I mean, the pads pop when you play Army.
Yeah.
They do.
I'm not going to lie to you, Trev. When I watch this game play, some people are going to like that I say this, but I'm going to say it anyway. When I watch this team play, I think to myself, these are the guys that are fighting for us, huh? We're going to be all right. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah,
we're going to be all right. These are disciplined kids that play hard and love to play. That's the thing, is they clearly love to play this game, and they are a physical football team. I mean, you talked about it. You said it to me before the show. Like, Bryson Daly's basically like a fullback at quarterback. Like, I mean, he's like 220 pounds. I mean, he takes a pounding, and he just keeps on balling, man. And that's kind of their whole team. Their linebackers aren't very athletic, but man, they're smart and they're physical. You know, they're often like watching their centers and guards. They're like these short, stubby, like just kind of chunky, just maulers. And you're like, all right, we're going to be all right. Like, we're going to be okay. We got these cats protecting us. We're going to be all right. We're going to be all right. And I enjoy that because, as I said, I hate the triple option. You know that, Trevor, and I hate everything that it's about. But I absolutely love watching these kids run it. I do, because of everything they stand for. And that right there is my favorite part of these games. It's the greatest brand in all of college athletics against just the best of us, in my opinion, in who we are as a country. You know what I mean? And that's just something that adds a ton to my enjoyment for this game. And you get to watch it in Yankee Stadium, which adds a little bit to the intrigue. And it's, like I said, it's the 100th anniversary of the 1924 game, which helped lead to Notre Dame's first ever national championship. I actually found a video on YouTube the other day because I was trying to find some old – is there any, like, film of, like, you know, those teams back then? And this guy did a full season breakdown of 1924, almost like he was doing he was updating the weekly rankings based on the results. So-and-so moves up. Like, I think Notre Dame started like number 5 in his rankings, and then like he would like update the rankings based on results, and it was really cool, man. To kind of have it, you know, Red Grange was a star back then in that year for Illinois, and Illinois was a top team, and he had that big game against Michigan, and you're just like, dude, think about what was going on that year. Like Harvard and Yale and Columbia were big, you know, Dartmouth were like top teams back then. Army was a top team back then. It was very, very cool, man. But, you know, fast forward 100 years, and they didn't play Yankee. They played at Polo Grounds that year is where they played in New York. But, man, it's a very cool experience. But this is you know, now we got all that out of the way. We respect y'all. We love y'all. Thank you for fighting for our freedom. But let's talk football, because this is a quality football team, Trevor, too, as we talked about. And the results kind of go – the results show you this is a gritty, tough football team that you're going to be in for a dogfight. You are. And that was a little bit of the reason I was a little disappointed they didn't put Virginia away a little bit more, because I would have liked to seen them get a little bit more rest before they have to travel east and play this football team.
Yeah, it's going to be physical, right? For all of the reasons that you just mentioned. And that's why I love watching the service schools play. Outside of what they do for our country, they play football for the right reasons, right? Army and Navy, they don't earn nil. They're not entering the transfer portal and trying to get all these guys coming in. Like it's their group of guys going against yours, which from a football standpoint makes you a really, really dangerous football team. Mm-hmm. It's guys that all play together. They play really well together as a unit. And Army, the biggest takeaway that I have watching them play, like you don't play an offense in North Texas that averages 40.6 points per game going into your game and hold them to 3 points on accident.
Yes. Because you controlled the clock. They only had 6 possessions, but they only scored on one of them. Mm-hmm. And I think it was their first one. Didn't they score like early? They got a field goal on like their first or second drive, and then
they had 3 trips to the red zone, 2 ended in interceptions, and one of them was a stop on 4th down.
Right.
You know, like it's just you don't do that because North Texas just played the worst game that they've ever played. That happens because you play a really gritty, tough football team.
Isn't that what we kind of keep saying about Notre Dame, right? Like there's a reason that every team that plays Notre Dame takes their worst loss of the year. Now that ended against UVA because that's not the worst loss they had this year. But it's not an accident that every team Notre Dame plays, that's their worst loss of the year. It's because Notre Dame's really good. And the same thing here is it's not an accident that teams tend to not play well against Army. It's not, it just so happens that that's the week everyone has a bad game. No, yes, they're not playing a lot of great teams, but they're punishing those teams, which is what good teams are supposed to do. Right. That's the argument people make for having Indiana in the top 5. Now, I'm not saying Army should be in the top 5 because there's a difference between not playing very good Big Ten teams and not playing very good AAC teams. There's a big difference. But I'm making the point that this is clearly one of the best group of 5 teams, and they've shown it on the field. And now Notre Dame's going to have to be in for a battle. Trevor, let's talk about this Army offense. It is a traditional option offense in a lot of ways. Navy's doing a lot of shotgun stuff. It's funny is when Navy was struggling against Notre Dame, they went back to their going under center with the wing. You remember that? Like when they kind of went back to that when they were struggling. But Army kind of does that right away. They will do some pistol. They will do some shotgun. But they have been primarily an under center team. And let's talk about some of the things about Army that make them a challenging team. And the first one is when you look at their offensive line, Trevor, they fit what they're trying to do very well in that they are a hammer. Their offense is a hammer. It is not finesse. They're coming right at you. All the perimeter stuff is all complementary to we're coming right at you. Right at you. And when you look at their offensive line, their left tackle and right tackle are both 6'6", 295, 297 guys. So big, tall, long guys. But on the inside, their center is 6'1", 295, and he looks a lot chunkier than 295. Their left guard is 6'2", 315, and their right guard is 6'4", 309. They are short, stout, and physical up the middle. And that's what makes their fullback runs and their quarterback runs so effective on top of the quality of those athletes. It's that right there. Those guys are very, very good players. And look, an option team relies on a lot of different things, right? You've got to have a quarterback. You've got to have a fullback. You've got to have all these different things. And, you look at kind of what they did, Trev, and against actually, I'm sorry. I just read you. I'm an idiot. I just read you the depth chart for North Texas. So that's my bad.
No, you're good. I was gonna say
yeah.
I think I looked at the interior of Navy's and I was like, oh gosh, I messed up an article. I got to go back.
No, that's on me. I was looking at the game notes for North Texas and gave you North Texas's depth chart. So I apologize. This is the bummer the only bummer about doing things live is when you do things like that, you kind of look back like, well, wish we could edit that out of there, but we can't. But anyway, when you look at Army, Trev, do you have their heights and weights in front of you while I pull up their depth there? Because they just released their game notes for the Notre Dame game.
I have their interior. I don't have the tackles. Now I know from left guard to right guard. Left guard is 6'1", 290. Center is 6 foot 313.
Okay, right, I was right. He does look chunkier than 295.
Yeah, so that was right.
Yes.
You are right. Yeah.
Yes.
Absolutely. And then right guard is 6'1", 310.
Yes. So that fits more with what they look like. Short, stout, stocky guys, physical guys. Their tackles numbers it's 60 and 65. They are 6'4", 6'3", 276, and then 6'3", 305. So I actually when I first looked at actually I'm sorry, they have 265 60s who are both offensive linemen. Thank you for that. Their starter is 6'4", 315. This is one of the heavier lines that Notre Dame has played this season, Trevor.
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
And they're stout, which means the pound per square inch basically is a lot more than we've seen. But it really starts with those guys. Their physicality, their toughness, they're maulers. I mean, they are. I mean, like where Navy's like trying to use athletic guys to get to the second level and work through on veer. The one biggest difference that I say about the Army offense is they like to have their offensive linemen drill at the first level and let that clog up wherever the linebackers are going. Did you notice that too? Like they don't seem to be as focused on getting their linemen to the second level like a lot of option teams are. And they've got the line to kind of pull that off because they can. I mean, there was one play they ran quarterback follow. They ran midline, and the quarterback delayed for a second and then runs right up to A gap. Their center, I think it was their center and their right guard, I think is who it was. Might have been the center and the left guard. Drove a North Texas defensive tackle back 7 yards and then planted him square on his back. And the quarterback just like, he wasn't even running. He just was like kind of slowly jogging, behind those guys and then scorched through once they put that guy on his back. And you're just like, okay, these kids aren't playing around. These kids are getting after it. And when you look at a Notre Dame defensive line that's not the biggest, I mean, Army outweighs them on the interior. That's a big difference between the traditional option teams and Notre Dame is they're usually these 6'4", 290-pound guys that are fast and get to the second level. Army has said, no, we're going to go physical, we're going to go big, and we're going to drive people off the line. And that's the primary goal. and that's what they do. And that's the biggest thing that makes their offensive line go, is that right there.
Yeah. I mean, you want to teach tape on what it's like to play with leverage, good leverage as an offensive lineman and drive back. I mean, go watch tape of Army. Yeah. Now, like I said, it does help that the interior of their offensive line, they go 6'1", 6'1". That will help with leverage, especially against guys like Riley Mills is like 6'6". Gabe Rubio is 6'5". So, naturally you already have the advantage when it comes to playing with a lower pad level. But again, the leg drive is there. They're very, very, very physical at the point of attack, and they do a really good job of finishing blocks.
Mm-hmm.
Really good job.
Yep. So, here's the other thing that's a challenge is the second key. Well, actually, the difference between a really good option team and a great option team is the line. The foundation of the option is quarterback and fullback, and Navy is outstanding there. Obviously, Bryson Daly this season is already over 1,000 yards, despite only playing 8 games. He missed their matchup against Air Force, did not play in that game. And he has 1,062 yards in the season, 21 touchdowns. He's averaging 6.1 per carry. Kanye Udo has 856 yards, 6.7 yards per carry, and 9 touchdowns. And if you go back and watch that Air Force game, that game was a battle for about 50 minutes. And Army pulled away late because of Udo. He basically took that game over in the fourth quarter and ripped off a couple long runs and rushed for 158 yards in that game. So Bryson Daly's out. Somebody's got to step up. He does. And he's rushed for over 100 yards, Trev, in 4 of his last 6 games. And one of the games he didn't get to 100 yards was against UAB. He had 97 and didn't play a good chunk of the fourth quarter because they won 44-10. That is one of the better fullback quarterback running combos that we've seen from a triple option team in a long time. It really reminds me, going back to the Ricky Dobbs, Alexander Teach to 2009, 2010 Navy teams that Notre Dame fans probably still have nightmares about. So that is what ultimately is the O-line's the driving force, but what makes it dynamic are those two guys. So personnel wise, how do you stop Army? Figure out how to slow those two guys down. That's it. Now, I don't know how you do that, but that's the key, is trying to slow down those two guys, because that's really it. I mean, they're slot backs and those, I mean, they're nice players and they can make big plays, but this really comes down to Udo and Daly. That's really what it comes down to.
We talk about matchups all the time, and this is a matchup that's going to be interesting for Notre Dame's defense and a lot of the offenses that they face, including Navy's, for how much they like to push the ball to the perimeter. And they're kind of that new age style of, triple option, I guess you could call it. Now, they did resort back to it later in the game, but they aren't as effective as running it as Bryson Daly and Kanye Udo are. They've combined for 30 rushing touchdowns this season. And Bryson Daly's played in 1 less game, which makes it all the more impressive, right? But from a matchup standpoint, these aren't two guys that are just going to burn you to the perimeter, which is something that Notre Dame's defense actually does a really, really good job of. It is right up the middle, right at your face, and it's going to be interesting to see how Notre Dame's defense is going to be able to handle and respond to them. Because I don't know if they faced a team like that this season. I don't know if they have. I don't know if they face a team that's just like, hey, listen, we're not going to try to push it to the perimeter. Oddly enough, most teams still try to do that despite knowing what Notre Dame has put on film. But I don't think
teams realize that until they play them. No. I really don't. We were in the press box talking about that. We're like, why is Virginia trying to out-athlete Notre Dame with their running game? I don't understand that, because did you not watch film? I really don't think people realize how fast this team is. I don't.
Yeah.
Until you play it. Because otherwise I can't understand half the things that people do. Like Georgia Tech, tried to make it almost a full perimeter game against Notre Dame and just got completely shut down. Yeah. And you think after a while, you'd think teams would be like, hey, maybe that's not the greatest idea ever. But you're correct. The Army, that will not be such. Now, Army's going to have to find ways to get to the perimeter.
Yep.
And they do that, but their bread and butter is the different ways. And here's the other thing too, Trevor, that makes it a challenge is they run a lot of stuff. So let me go through and tell you all the unique run concepts that I saw in this game. Number one, midline. Now, when I talk about midline, I'm not talking about just the dive aspect where they can just call the dive. I'm talking about the true midline triple. Watching this offense, they run the triple more than an option team that I've seen run it in a while. And I talked about this before the Navy game, that watching the triple teams, really going back to Malcolm Perry, since Malcolm Perry, the Navy team, they've not been a true triple team. They run double option, but a lot of stuff they do is it's the full dive is either a handoff or it's smoke. It's not a true triple read. They run true, and you can tell by the way the footwork, by the way that the quarterback rides the fake. You can tell when he's just faking it and when he's reading it. They ran midline. They ran basically veer. This is just me charting the runs. Quarterback counter, which as soon as you overplay the midline or the veer, they will come back with quarterback counter. And that was their first touchdown against North Texas. Inside zone from shotgun. Outside zone from shotgun, which is basically just the quarterback. They just run outside zone and the fullback leads the quarterback and he just kind of waits until he sees something. They do so much of that in the run game, Trevor, which you talk about how good Bryson Daly is, but this is because of the line. He will literally start working laterally very slowly until he sees a hole open up and then he runs through it. They do that a ton. And it's like that's not even I don't even know what the play is. The play is just follow. They do run quarterback follow, which is not what I'm talking about. And that's essentially where you ride the fullback and then the quarterback takes a step and then just follows the fullback through the hole. That may look like he's just, he's making, no, that's a design play, quarterback duck. They'll run toss. They'll run a jet sweep. This is all just from the North Texas game, Trevor. This isn't even like over the course of this is just North Texas. Speed option, Q power with the jet read, and a reverse off of midline, where they literally faked midline and handed off on a reverse around the backside. That's just the North Texas game, Trevor. That you have to prepare for all that. There's a lot to this, and it's all run game stuff. And somebody said, is QB follow different from midline option? Yes, because midline option is an option. You can either hand off or go or pitch. Follow is literally he'll ride it, take a step, let it, and just tuck inside. It's not the same as that, and then he takes a couple steps and makes his read and inserts based on his read. It is literally, and sometimes I've even seen him where he'll follow and then just kind of keep going right behind the fullback, right up the center's behind. And so it is different than midline, but a lot of times it's off the midline action. And so, you're thinking, hey, we're going to crash the midline, and then linebackers are going to – here's why you do that. They're going to crash the end of the 3 technique onto the fullback, take him out, right? And then, backer's going to scrape over top for the quarterback because he's thinking, hey, they're going to get to the edge. So the linebacker steps out, and you just do that, and then you just dip right behind it. And now they got to cut, revert, plant, revert back. It's just something to mess with your eye discipline. It's not something they run 30 times a game. They'll run it 3-4 times a game. And it's because they think your second level's overplaying the option look. And so they'll just have them ride that sucker and just get right up in behind it. It's just another wrinkle that forces you to say, hey, don't get too comfortable just flying outside because we got some stuff for it. That's what good option teams do. Like, hey, if you're flying outside, we're going to have some stuff trap. We're going to have, and I didn't see any trap in this game either, Trevor, from them. And I know I've seen it from them in the past. So they still left some stuff in the magazine. You know what I'm saying? There's still some rounds in the magazine that they didn't use against North Texas. But that's what they did to control the game against North Texas. And I promise you, folks, against Notre Dame, they're going to try a similar game plan of we are going to make sure Notre Dame's offense is not on the field at all in this game and wear down that undersized but athletic Notre Dame defense. Because they're going to look at Notre Dame and say, there's no way we can run with these guys. No way. The only hope we have is to beat them into submission and just be physical and be brutes against them. That's it. That's it. We're not going to outrun these guys, fellas. We're not. We may be able to outrun some AAC defenses, but we're not outrunning this Notre Dame defense. But you know what? They have a 275-pound nose tackle. And if their starter All-American's not playing, and if they're All-Americans playing, he's 285. Their ends aren't that big. They're kind of long, so we can chop them. and their linebackers are not the biggest guys in the world outside of Kingston and Drake. They're really fast. Let's make Jack Kaiser come downhill and go toe-to-toe with our 300-plus pound guard and center. Let's make Jaden Osbury come downhill and play big boy football against our guard and center. Because if we start letting those guys work laterally, we're toast. We're toast. Now, they'll do some quick hitters and some things like that, but this is going to be a bully game. They're going to try to bully Notre Dame right up the middle, and that's going to be a big, big key for Notre Dame, Trev. And that's the one big difference between them and Navy. Navy is a lot more intricate. They're not as big. They're not as physical. They're faster, in my opinion, and they throw the ball more effectively. At least they did until Notre Dame broke them. But Army is like, if Army could only throw 2-3 passes a game, they'd be very happy. Very different mindset. Very different mindset with them. So that's the biggest thing with them, Trev.
What Army does a really good job of is forcing opponents to play almost perfect complementary football. Like legit. Like that's why, excuse me, you had a team like North Texas score 3 points against them. Not only did they limit the possessions, they did a really good job in those limited possessions. I mean, Army also, it's not like North Texas had 6 offensive possessions and Army had 19, right? Like, I mean, I think Army had like 7. They just eat the football. I mean, Army went on a 43-yard drive that resulted in 0 points, but it took over 10 minutes off the clock. That's crazy. They went on, I know it went viral and everything, but they went on a 21-play, 94-yard drive that took up a quarter. So that's what Army does so well, is they put teams in a bind to not only Notre Dame has relied on their defense kind of opening up the margin for error for the other 2 phases of the game, right? Like it's, special teams might not have covered this as well, or special teams might have fumbled or something or muffed the kick. Our defense is good enough to kind of bail us out. Notre Dame's offense has sputtered at times, and they go on, quarter-long droughts of scoring or quarter-long droughts of putting together multiple scoring drives. But we know the defense is going to get the ball back to us, within 2.5 minutes, and we can kind of reset. That's not going to be the case on Saturday. If it is, we're talking about a football game that's not that close, right? But what Army has proved this year is that they do a really good job, and they put teams in binds of not only do you have to play perfect when you get your limited opportunities on offense, they put defenses in a spot where you have to play as physical up front. The front 7 is going to have to play solid if you're Notre Dame. And the strength of your defense right now is the secondary, which is essentially the passing game defense, right? Like you see all the stats rattled off. That is a non-factor when you play Army. Well, I don't want to say non-factor, but they threw 4 passes against North Texas, and 1 of them was intercepted, right? So if Army doesn't have to throw the football, they won't.
Biggest difference between Army and Navy is this, Trevor. Before he got hurt against Tulane, Blake Horvath had thrown at least 11 passes in all but 1 game. And the 1 game he didn't was against Temple because they didn't need it. Bryson Daly has only thrown more than 9 passes a game once, and that was 10 against East Carolina. He's attempted 6, 4, 9, 6, 5, 7, 10, and like you said, he attempted 4 passes against North Texas. Mm-hmm. So in 1, 2, 3 of his 8 starts this season, he has thrown 5 or fewer passes in a game. They are an old school option team with some very intriguing wrinkles. There's no doubt. And here's the interesting thing too, Trev, about them is we just spent a lot of time about their offense, but that's not the best part of this football team. The best part of this football team is their defense. They have a very good defense. I mean, let's look at the numbers, Trev. You had it in your preview here at Irish Breakdown. Navy is the number 1 scoring defense in the country. Although someone pointed out to me today that if Notre Dame did not give up those 2 garbage touchdowns, Bill Trocchi actually said this to me. I have to go back and look at it. But Bill Trocchi said if Notre Dame didn't give up the 2 touchdowns in the final 30 seconds against Georgia Tech and Virginia, that they would have the number 1 scoring defense in college football. Thought that was interesting. But they rank number 1 in scoring defense. They're number 5 in total defense, number 13 in yards per play. They're the number 3 rushing defense in the country. They're 15th in yards per rush. They are 32nd in passing yards allowed, 12th in yards allowed per attempt, second in yards allowed per completion. They have the number 1 red zone defense in the country. So even though statistically their offense is more impressive because of the nature of a triple option team, so you're going to be first in rushing yards or second in rushing yards every year, even when you're not good. You're going to be super high in yards per attempt and yards per completion in the pass game and fewest sacks allowed because you don't throw the ball at all. Their offense is very good at all those things, but they're number 22 in the country in scoring offense and number 45 in the country in scoring or total offense, where they're 1st and 5th in defense. Now, their offense being on the field a lot helps their defense keeps points down and yards down. But even if you look at the per play averages, Trevor, they're still really good. They're 13th in the country in yards allowed per rush. Yards allowed per play. They're 15th in the country in yards allowed per rush. They're 12th in the country in yards allowed per pass attempt. So they don't allow. And they do that while only ranking 64th in sacks. So this is the side of the ball that I shouldn't say it's the best part of their team, but it's I may want to walk that part back. I don't know that I want to say it's the best part of their team, but it's been the biggest difference between what they were last year and what they are this year is the improvement they made on defense. I think that's I'm probably more comfortable saying that than I am the other way around. And it's been it's actually kind of fun to watch them because they're so sound and they're very well coached and they're physical. That's the thing, based out of a 3-4 defense. But they'll mix up their fronts. But let's talk about their defense, Trev. What was your thoughts kind of as you go through? Obviously, you broke down the stats. You looked at the depth chart. What are the things you see when you go through and break down this Army football team?
They play really well as a unit. They swarm the football. And like we talked about earlier in the show, the pads pop when you play Navy or when you play Army, man. They do. They fly downhill. They are not afraid of contact. This might be one of, if not the most physical team that Notre Dame has played yet this season. In the second half of the season, Notre Dame kind of ramped it up and they started playing more physical football and winning more in the trenches. Defensively, like the young linebacking core has grown every single week and they've been flying around the field and the pads have been popping. That's been Navy since week 1. Mm-hmm. This might be one of the few teams on Notre Dame's schedule that can kind of go pound for pound with them in terms of, just laying the wood. It's one of those games that Notre Dame is going to be taking some ice baths afterwards, I guess, if that makes sense. That is the one noticeable thing that jumps off the screen at me when I watch this team play. But Army's a very they don't do a lot of things great athletically, I guess, if that makes sense. They are not. No player jumps off the page of they're fundamentally sound. They hit really hard, but this guy is a dude. They just play very, very well as a unit. They have some decent corners, I will say. Army as a team has generated a good amount of interceptions this year. I think they have 2 or 3 guys on their team that have at least 3 interceptions, and they have like 6 or 7 guys that have at least 2. And they are all in the secondary, I think, for one linebacker. It's like a safety, multiple corners, a nickel. So they do a good job of playing well as a unit. They are in the right spot at the right time. They're very fundamentally sound, and they hit you really hard. Those are the 3 main things that I take away from watching this Army team.
Well, the other thing too, Trevor, and I'm kind of having – I'm putting all these down so we can kind of compare them to what they are, like with their offense, but it's a similar thing that you're looking at here. And that is that this is a team that's got size up front. And we don't normally see that with the service academies. You just don't often see a lot of size. You don't see, teams say, hey, well, you're just going to kind of bully this team. But I'm looking at the starting defensive line. So like there are 3 defensive linemen and then their stand-up outside linebacker that is like an alignment. 6'3", 280, 6'1", 301, and 6'5", 275. Like they're not this really small, like undersized group of guys like you normally see from these option teams. It's a different animal. And that's something, and it's not just the starters. Their backups have some size to them as well. You know, they got a 6'6", 240-pound guy that they bring off the bench. They've got their other backup nose is a big guy that's like 280 plus. So like they've got some size to them, especially in the starting lineup. They got a 6'3", 265-pound guy coming off the bench, right? Where, you know, they're bringing in that. And then their linebackers aren't real big guys, but they're physical. They're like 225-ish, but they're physical. And that's the thing that's interesting about this game is they're not the kind of line you can just go bully just because you're bigger than they are. They actually have good size, and and like you said earlier, they compete. Trev, they get after it. There's no doubt they really get after it in the run game, and that factors into why they have the number one run defense in the country, which I believe they still have. Right? We just looked at that. Yeah, they still have the number one rate. No, they're down to number 3 in the country in rush defense. But they are behind Ole Miss and Indiana. They're at 82.6, and they're closer to Ole Miss at number 2 than they are to Ohio State at number 4. So this is a legitimate run defense in my opinion. Now, here's some things to consider as well. We're going to find out I think that Navy Army is a legitimately I think this is probably the best group of 5 defense I've seen so far from a production standpoint, results, physicality standpoint. We're going to find out really how good they are this weekend, though. And you started to get a little bit of an answer to that against North Texas because that team was coming in scoring 40 points a game. They held them to 3 points in the game. But coming into this game, this is the ranks of the teams that they have played in scoring offense, okay? 108, 111, 122, 90, 93, 32, and that team, by the way, had 28 points against them. That was ECU, right after they fired their coach, by the way. 127, then, of course, North Texas at 16. That's the scoring offenses. Here's the ranks on total offense that they faced. 90th, 111th, 124th, 72nd, 62nd, 39th, ECU, 125th, and 3rd. They have that team that ranked 3rd to 3 points. Here's the rushing offenses they faced this year. 64th, 115th, 125th, 76th, 97th, 75th, 14th. That's Air Force. And then North Texas is 72nd. So they have done a very good job this year shutting down opponent run game. Ironically, the team that ran the most against them was Lehigh, is the team that ran for the most yards against them at 172 in the opener. That's it. They have held, let's see here, rushing defense. They have held 3, 4, 5, 6 of their 9 opponents to less than 90 yards rushing. They have held 3 of their opponents to minus 50 yards rushing, including minus 5 from Temple. So, and they held Air Force to 117 yards. And let's be honest, Air Force isn't that good this year. We can be honest about that. Now they get to face a Notre Dame offense that ranks 12th in the country in rushing and that ranks 4th in the country in yards per rush with the 3 teams. And by the way, Notre Dame is the number 1 rushing offense in the country amongst Power 4 teams in yards per attempt. The only teams ahead of them are Army, Boise, and New Mexico. That's it. So this is a challenge unlike anything that Navy has faced this season, if we're being honest, right? And that's where you look and say, okay, this is where Notre Dame needs to be able to take advantage, right? This is what right? And you talk about the teams that they've played, Trevor, and they have not played a tough schedule. But again, what are good teams supposed to do when they play bad teams? Dominate. And they've dominated, which is evidence that this is a good football team.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, the thing that I encourage everybody is to not look at this as it's a service school. It's Army. Guys, we've already kind of done this whole song and dance when Notre Dame played Navy. This is a good football team. Brian and I aren't sitting here trying to convince everybody that Army is about to go compete for a national championship because they held North Texas to 3 points. We're painting the picture that this is a quality opponent because it is. Like Army poses much like how Army has not faced a Notre Dame team that's like this. Army has not faced a team that has Notre Dame's size and athleticism and speed. Sure. Notre Dame is also not faced an offense like Army's. Yes, Navy was also like the triple option. Blake Horvath is not the runner that Bryson Daly is. They're not.
Yeah.
And Navy also didn't have the size and the strength that Army did. So it's both can be said. It's just painting the picture that this is a difficult opponent and one that Notre Dame is going to have to be very disciplined when they play, because there's a chance that if one side of the ball doesn't play well, Notre Dame might end up with 6 offensive possessions or 7. And like I said earlier in the show, Notre Dame had 5 scoreless offensive possessions in the first half. Can't happen. So this is going to be a game that Notre Dame's going to have to be up for. Absolutely.
The funny thing is, you've got some people in the chat that they just want to talk about how they suck. And like, this is why you guys do this to yourselves, because you disrespect your opponent all week. And then when Notre Dame dominates, you're just like, well, you're supposed to dominate. Like, instead of appreciating how good they've played, this is a good football team. Does that mean that Army's not good? No, it doesn't. That Notre Dame's not. Notre Dame should beat them. Notre Dame, I think, will beat them. But if you can't respect your opponent, then you're just not going to enjoy what you're seeing as much. This is not going to be an easy win for Notre Dame. Can Notre Dame win convincingly? Of course. They're going to have to earn it. If they do beat Army 42-10, as someone is saying it will be earned. It will be physical. It will be a tough, hard-nosed, hard-fought 42-10 victory. And as grown-ups, we can talk about how good the opponent is, and it doesn't have to be taken by you that means we're saying Notre Dame's not good. Because you can respect your opponent and still say your team is better. And that's what we're trying to do here. We're trying to give you guys a proper appreciation. People who have not seen Army play and just assume because they're doing what you said, Troy, this is a service academy. Well, okay. I've seen Army play a lot this year. This is a good football team. This is a better football team than a lot of the teams that Notre Dame has been beaten up on recently. Like, they would smash Florida State. They would probably beat Virginia, in my opinion. I think so. I think Virginia would have a tough time stopping Army.
Yeah,
they'd probably beat Stanford, to be honest with you. We'll see what they do against Navy. That'll be an interesting game. This is a good football team. It's a good football team. And you need to be able to appreciate that and respect that, because this is a good football team. And if you're falling for the trap of what the national people like to do, which is talk down every opponent that Notre Dame plays, and you're falling into that trap. Don't do that. This is a good football team. This is a very well-coached football team. And this is a very physical football team. Georgia Tech was a very physical football team too. Somebody said, well, I don't buy that they're physical because I watched Notre Dame shut down Georgia Tech. What does that have to do with anything? Whatever Notre Dame did to Georgia Tech has nothing to do with what Army is. Just because they're physical doesn't mean that Notre Dame sucks and they're not going to be physical and going to get beat. What we're saying is it's a physical football team. Notre Dame needs to go out and handle their business and be prepared for a physical football game. Doesn't mean Notre Dame can't handle it and can't win, but it's speaking about who they are. This is a good football team. Is it one Notre Dame should win? Guys, there's a reason they're a 14-point favorite. But this is a good football team. And there's also a reason why they're only a 14-point favorite and not a 20-something point favorite like they were for others. What was the spread in the Navy game? Wasn't it 20-something?
Something, yeah. It was close. I think it was like 18.5 at one point. Yeah.
So this is a good football team. And Jeff Monken's done a heck of a job getting them ready to play. There's no question about it. But as we were trying to allude to, Trevor, this is a test unlike anything Army has faced so far this season, in my opinion. And here's the biggest concern for me. When you look at this matchup, if you're looking at it from a Notre Dame standpoint, it's if your offense comes out and is not efficient, if your defense comes out and has a slow start, then this is the kind of game where they can make this a really short game. And that's the thing, is like the things that Notre Dame has not done well, you can't afford to do against Army for the same reasons you couldn't afford to do them against Navy. And that's going to be a big key. So we're going to talk a lot more about it on Thursday, but like you said, no one has run right at Notre Dame for a while. And that was the weirdest thing about the Georgia Tech game, because they didn't really try to do that either. And that's what I want to see if Army can do.
Yeah, I agree. I have two major areas of concern. I don't want to say major, but two areas of concern for Notre Dame in this game. One is offensive efficiency. That is something that they just haven't shown all year. And in games like this, you have to be efficient. Now, mind you, one of their most efficient games was against Navy, who does not run the same offense as Army, but it's the most like out of the other opponents that they've played, right? But I'm worried about that. But even Navy didn't try to run directly at Notre Dame. Argument could be made. The last team that did that was Northern Illinois. Like that over the stretch of the game.
Just be physical, come right at them. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that's the last opponent that tried to do it.
Louisville didn't. Miami, Ohio didn't. Purdue doesn't know how. Stanford didn't. Georgia Tech oddly didn't.
Nope.
Navy didn't. Florida State certainly didn't. They don't know how. But I mean, Florida State did have some success running right up the middle.
My area of concern is when teams have not done it for the entire game because for whatever reason, like we alluded to earlier in the podcast, teams just still for some reason try to out-athlete Notre Dame and try to push it to the perimeter and just think that this is like the Notre Dame defense of old that doesn't have wheels like they do.
Get that. I don't get that.
But teams have had success against Notre Dame when they've ran right at them.
Yeah.
Which is
now
Army's
part of that's because Notre Dame's tried to dare some teams to do that. Because it's like that's not what they do best.
Sure.
What made the Georgia Tech game interesting is that Notre Dame took away what Georgia Tech did best, which is running up the middle. Mm-hmm. And to a degree kind of force the ball. And Georgia Tech played right into Notre Dame's hands by doing that. So we're going to see because like you said, this is a level of speed that Army hasn't seen so far this season. And so it's for Notre Dame, it's, hey, can you, because like the other thing about Army that you look at their statistics too, Trevor, they are number one in the country in fewest tackles for loss allowed. Mm-hmm. Because they don't pitch the ball a ton. They are downhill, like you said. Everything is quickly getting downhill. They'll pitch it, but I mean, probably 7-8 pitches a game, maybe.
Yeah.
A lot of it's just right downhill, right in the A gap, off tackle, quarterback duck, quarterback follow, counter, inside zone, stuff like that. The quarterback outside zone where he's basically you're just stretching until he finds a hole. And then he hits it. And he hits it quick, too. Like, he'll be like, slow, boom, gets through the hole. So I just I'm curious to see what Notre Dame's game plan is against Army. Because it's almost like you want to dare them to get the ball outside. But then if you're not disciplined outside, they can get some gash plays on you. So it will be curious because one thing that Al Golden has been very good at is we're going to take away what you do best.
Yeah.
Well, how do you do that against Army? That's how do you do that? How do you take the ball out of the quarterback's hands? What's your game plan going to be? And do you expose yourself to other big play opportunities if you do that?
Mm-hmm.
That's what's going to be very interesting. Very interesting.
I'm going to be interested to see what he does on the defensive front, on the defensive line. I'm going to be interested to see like what personnel groupings he puts in. Mm-hmm. Because I think you could see a lot of Gabe Rubio and Riley Mills. I think because they kind of been coming out in like different duo sets, right? Like especially when Howard Cross was healthy. When Howard Cross was healthy, it was him and Riley Mills out there. And then when they would rotate, it'd be Gabe Rubio, and then it would be Donnie Heinisch, right? Mm-hmm. Now, obviously, that Howard Cross is hurt. It's going to be interesting to see what they do. RJ Oben has actually been pretty decent in the run game.
Yeah, run game, yeah.
Yeah, I think he's been pretty solid in the run game. This is going to be another game where, I won't get too much into it now because I know we're going to talk about this throughout the week, but it could be another big Josh Burnham game. Like it's going to be interesting to see what they do on the defensive front to help disrupt it. Because if there's one thing that will stop the triple option is it's a lot of interior pressure, but they do a really good job of not letting plays get blown up in the backfield. Yeah. So really interesting.
Yep. And one of the things that we'll discuss in future shows tomorrow, and especially on Thursday in the Keys to Victory show, is going to be how does Notre Dame use their athleticism against Navy in this game on both sides of the ball. That's going to be a very, very interesting part of this matchup. So, yeah, and somebody asked, I think it's a fair question. Somebody asked, do you risk playing an injured Howard Cross or rest him for South Carolina? I mean, look, I'm all hands on deck in this game. If he's healthy enough to play, I mean you can't if you don't win this game, then it doesn't matter. Doesn't matter.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I mean, it's again, kind of the common theme of it's weird that this is the all hands on deck game, Notre Dame Army, but the situation is what it is. And Notre Dame and Marcus Freeman and the rest of the coaching staff have shown, like, if a player is good to go, they will play them. Like, it hasn't been but we might sit him because of who's coming up.
I mean, if anything, I'd say I'd rather sit him against USC than Army.
Yeah. Yeah. Agreed.
Because Donovan Hinish is going to project better in that game. I mean, you know what I mean? Like this is a game where, like, okay, if one of your corners was banged up, like if Benjamin Morrison was still playing with a sore shoulder, you say, maybe you sit him this game, and then get him ready for USC. But with your front seven guys, like, look, I'm going to need you for this game. We can give me a rest next week. You know what I mean? Like next week against USC, that's when you need your athletes. This week, it's like you need your big boys ready to play.
Yeah.
But if he's not good to go, I wouldn't play him. Like, I mean, you don't need to put him out there if he's 70%.
Right.
Because 70% Howard Cross is not better than 100% Donovan Hinish or 100% Gabriel Rubio, in my opinion. So that's the thing that you have to kind of look at. So we're going to see how it's going to play out, man. But I'm very much looking forward to this matchup, Trevor. It is like I said, it's a great opportunity for Notre Dame to go out there and make a statement against a good football team that the committee respects, even though some Notre Dame fans may not respect it, but the committee certainly respects this football team. And, as I said, you look at the weekend, Notre Dame, I wish the rankings came out. Like, I wish they did like a Sunday night show instead of Tuesday. I really wish they would do it sooner. But, Notre Dame plays Army, who was ranked 24th last week. We'll see where they are this week. Number 9 Miami plays Wake Forest, who's 4-6. Number 11 Ole Miss plays 5-5 Florida. Number 14 SMU plays at Virginia. Have you noticed how many teams that SMU has played the week after Notre Dame? They've gotten very fortunate. They've had multiple games this year where they've had the week after Notre Dame plays them. I think most of their common opponents have been that way, but this will be another game where they get that opportunity. You have Georgia hosts UMass. Tennessee hosts 2-8 UTEP. UMass is also 2-8. They just fired their head coach. Texas hosts 4-6 Kentucky. Penn State plays at 6-4 Minnesota. BYU, who will drop below Notre Dame, plays at 8-2 Arizona State. That's one of the sneakier best games of the week.
Yeah,
by the way, Desmond Howard completely clowned himself this weekend. Did you see that comment? He's like, why are we talking about Arizona State? Like, dude, this is why you just totally gave all the anti-ESPN people more ammo to not respect ESPN because you had no clue that those were two good football teams. Total clown show. But you look at the rest of the weekend, Trevor, like the other top teams that are in contention, maybe with being around Notre Dame. Alabama plays at 5-5 Oklahoma. Texas A&M plays at 4-6 Auburn. Very sneaky game for Texas A&M. You hope that they're not looking past Auburn for Texas. And then, of course, LSU plays home against Vanderbilt in a battle of unranked teams. I just had to say that. I'm sorry. But it's going to be a wild weekend, but there's that big noon game. And then there's the night game with Notre Dame and Army. And those are the two big games of the weekend. And I think that helps it works out perfectly for Notre Dame, Trevor, from a scheduling standpoint, because there's going to be so many teams, so many voters and pollsters and fans and different people that are going to be tuning into that game, because what else are they going to watch?
Yeah.
Let's look at the 7 p.m. games. Boise State at Wyoming, Washington State at Oregon, Alabama at Oklahoma, Texas A&M at Auburn, Vanderbilt at LSU, and Cincinnati at Kansas State. That's what Notre Dame is competing with for eyes on Saturday.
Yeah. I mean, the only other one that sounds like it could be interesting would be Washington State at Oregon. But outside of that,
It's Washington State at Oregon State.
At Oregon State.
Yeah, I misspoke. It's at Oregon State.
Okay.
Oregon, I believe, is off this weekend. They have a very weird late bye because they're 11-1 right now after beating Wisconsin.
They have a bye week and then they play one more game.
And then the 8 Big Ten title game. Yeah, very odd. It's like as dumb as having one after week 1. I've never understood that either.
No.
Yeah. So, but like that's what they're competing against. I mean, the next best game is what? Alabama at 5-5 Oklahoma. Alabama's a 14-point favorite. A&M at Auburn. A&M only being a 2.5-point favorite, I thought was really odd.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Like really odd. At 4-6 Auburn, I think that's something Mike Elko is going to use to his advantage.
I think so too.
Yeah, so it's going to be a very unique weekend. And as we said, Trev, at the beginning, it's a great opportunity for Notre Dame to make a big statement in this game. It really is. It really is. Joe Marciano said, watch out for Florida at Ole Miss. We talked about that a little bit earlier, but that game's in the afternoon. That's a 12 o'clock game. That game's going to be competing against Ohio State and Indiana.
Right.
So, like the games we listed off are all night games. That's the night slate for the weekend, competing against Notre Dame for eyes. So it's going to be interesting, and it's a great opportunity for Notre Dame to go out there and remind everyone why they're a top team. You know, because like I swear I started reading some of the articles, and everybody's got Notre Dame in their playoff, and I started hearing some of the same crap you heard after the Texas A&M game, like, oh, they're a lock, they're a shoe-in. Only question is where they should be ranked, and I'm like, hold on a second. We heard the same thing in week 2. And that's to a degree, Trevor, why I think this is a bit of a litmus test for Notre Dame, because how do the Notre Dame players get up for a game like this? It's Army. Do they have the attitude that some of the fans have? It's Army. It's no big deal. Do they get caught up in the moment of Yankee Stadium and the Shamrock jerseys and all that? I mean, do they have the same focus they need to have in a game like this? That's a question. That ultimately is what's going to determine the outcome of this game is, does Notre Dame come here focused like, hey, we're playing a top 25 team away from home. We've got to be locked in and ready to play. Or is it, hey, we've shown everybody who we are. We're the big boys now. Check us out. Look how great we are at Notre Dame, which is how they felt about themselves after Texas A&M. And that's going to be a very interesting piece, which is why I'm glad Marcus Freeman is not pretending like the Northern Illinois game didn't happen with his football team. He's reminding them of from what he says, every week. Let's not forget what happens when we don't play Notre Dame football. And this is another week. Or does Army being ranked help keep them focused and ensures that they come out and play their best? That's what we don't know. We're talking about young men. We don't know the answer to that. We don't know what version of we're going to get. I'm encouraged that we've seen a pretty good version of Notre Dame week after week after week, but that's always true until that one game where it doesn't happen. You know what I mean? And it's an unknown, but a very important part of this matchup.
Yeah, I mean, success on Saturday is going to come down to what Marcus Freeman's been harping on the last, every single week since the Northern Illinois game, mental and physical preparation. From a physical standpoint, we just spent the last 2 hours talking about how physical of a football team Army is, right? And I would make the argument that after watching them play, they might be the most physical team that Notre Dame has faced in quite some time, So this season, quite some time. From a mental preparation standpoint, you have all of the distractions in the world. The media is finally back on your side, talking about how you're shooing for the playoffs and how they're a lock for probably a home playoff game, depending on where they fall. Now it's just a question of who they're going to play. You got the fancy Shamrock Series jerseys. You're playing at Yankee Stadium. It's another night game. So if Notre Dame comes out and plays a solid, fundamentally sound, aggressive football game, that's going to be a testament to that I can confidently say, on top of this being the 9th straight win for this football team, that they have truly put and learned the valuable lessons of that loss in Northern Illinois behind them. And now they can focus, and it's, faceless opponent. It's, all of those things. It's Notre Dame is now playing their standard of football, which will put me in a much more comfortable spot when I'm talking and thinking about this football team.
They have a chance to end the year with their longest regular season win streak since 2020.
Yeah.
And if you think this year's schedule is soft, go back and remind yourself what that 2020 schedule looked like, especially since Clemson played Notre Dame without 3 of their best players, including Trevor Lawrence. And there is a lot at stake. You just never know if the players are going to see it the same way we do.
Right.
You never know that are they going to see it in the same historical context that we do, or are they just so locked into what's in front of them that they don't need to see that? They don't need that focus. I mean, that's going to be the key. That's what Marcus Freeman and his staff have in front of them is how do we keep this team focused, and how do we keep this like does Mike Denbrock, is he happy with not happy? I'm sure he's not happy with the way the game went last week, but does he look at it as an opportunity to say, hey, look, we didn't play well from a focus standpoint, and does that allow him to really, pound that drum this week of, hey guys, that's not good enough, and to get them ready to go. Like, there's just so many different of those storylines that and look, the national media is going to dismiss this game if Notre Dame wins and wins convincingly, but I don't think the committee will. And that's why it matters. And that's why you hope this team is focused and locked in coming into this game. So
absolutely.
Trevor, anything else you'd like to discuss about this game, or, we're kind of done with the show, but if there's something else you'd like to chat about, we can just talk about that a little bit. Oh, I did want to talk to, we had an intel piece on Justin Thurman decommitting. So I gave some backstory on kind of how that happened. That was more of a mutual parting of ways. I have a great deal of respect for Justin Thurman and his family. I'm happy for him that he found a new home and a place that's a better fit for him as a football player. He would have been a great fit at Notre Dame as a student athlete, but I just felt like it was going to be tough for him to work up the depth chart at running back. And we broke down kind of how that whole thing went, but happy that he was able to get where he got to. So don't really plan on spending a whole lot more time on that. We had an intel piece when it happened at Irish Breakdown, boards at irishbreakdown.com. But anything else, Trev? I know tonight we're going to have real quick. Tonight we will, if you guys are listening now, go subscribe to the CFB Nation channel. So we're going to go live when the playoff rankings start. I believe is it 7, right, Trevor? Am I correct on that? I believe it's at 7. Let me go look live here real quick.
Yeah, last
7
week.
o'clock.
Yeah, last week it started a little later because they were fitting it in between basketball games.
So we'll start at 7 o'clock on the CFB Nation channel. We'll go live. It'll be Bill Troche and myself. We'll see who else wants to join us. So we'll have the live recap. So as they announce the teams, we'll break it down and talk about it nationally. And then after that show, probably around 8 o'clock, we will then 8:30. We'll see. That's why you got to hit that subscribe and hit that notification bell. We'll then go live on the Irish Breakdown channel to focus more on the Notre Dame aspect of it. So we'll break that ranking down tonight. So Trev will be with me at least for one of those shows. I got to talk to him about the other one. Haven't talked to him about that one yet. And then tomorrow, obviously, buy, sell, hold. Tomorrow, Thursday, we'll do our keys to victory and our predictions. Friday, mailbag. I don't know if Trev, I forget what time your flight is on Friday. What time's your?
Yeah, I'll be traveling at like 8 a.m. and then I don't get into New York until like 1.
So you won't be on the mailbag with me on Friday. I remember I did something. I couldn't remember if I got you. I got you the late flight on Sunday, right?
Yep.
That's when I got you the late flight. Okay, so Trev will be traveling on Saturday, and so after Thursday, you guys might not see Trev for a few days. So enjoy it, because he won't be on the post-game show with us either. So if you're at Yankee Stadium, say hi to my guy. But we're going to have a very busy week, no doubt about it, guys, especially tonight, 7 o'clock, CFB Nation. We'll be going live on the CFB Nation channel. So you guys make sure you subscribe to that. Make sure you also have notifications turned on for that. We'll definitely have some fun talking about the rankings tonight. I'm very curious to see what movement there's going to be. I think there's going to be some shockers tonight. I really do. I don't know what that'll be. I hope that they don't include Notre Dame. Unless it's a good thing for Notre Dame, like they finally realize Penn State's not that good and move them down a little bit. But, you hope it's not like, let's pretend Georgia's great again and put them way up. But, that concerns me a little bit. But we'll see. I'm very curious how all those things shake out and see how the committee handles all that. But we'll break all that down tonight. And then, of course, afterwards, we will have our Notre Dame specific breakdown on the Irish Breakdown Podcast. So, hey, folks, on your way out, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, hit the notification bell, share this podcast, give us a 5-star review. Make sure you lock in with us tonight at 7 o'clock on CFB Nation. Myself, Bill Trotri, we'll have at least one other team member. We'll be going live tonight, breaking down the whole playoff rankings. Then after that, we will then go live on Irish Breakdown and look at it from more of a Notre Dame specific standpoint. And then, of course, take a look at some of the games this weekend that are going to have the biggest impact on the new rankings. So we'll have a lot to talk about tonight. So for Trevor, I'm Brian. Everybody have a great rest of your day. Thanks for joining us. We appreciate y'all very much, and we'll talk to you again here very soon on CFB Nation and the Irish Breakdown Podcast.